If, in the moment you needed it most, your spouse disappeared, and the person who came to help was someone holding a secret that could destroy your marriage, what would you do? The rain had been pounding against the window all night. Like the sky itself was restless. I sat on the edge of our bed, clutching my belly as another contraction ripped through me. It was too soon, 2 weeks before my due date, but I knew this wasn't just false labor. My body was telling me it was time. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling. I called Mark, my husband. It rang and rang, straight to voicemail. I called again, then again, still nothing. I sent a text. Mark, I think the baby's coming. Please come home, I need you. No reply. The clock read 11:42 p.m. I dialed his number again, but this time it didn't even ring. It went straight to voicemail. My mind started racing. Where was he? Why wasn't he answering? We'd had small fights before, but nothing that would make him ignore me in a moment like this. The pain intensified, each wave hitting harder and closer together. I needed help, and I needed it fast. My hospital bag was packed, sitting by the door, but the thought of driving myself in the middle of the night while in labor terrified me. I scrolled through my contacts, trying to think of who to call. My mom lived 2 hours away. My neighbor, Mrs. Harris, was probably asleep by now, and I didn't want to scare her. My best friend, Lila, was out of town on business. My eyes landed on a number I barely recognized, just a string of digits I'd saved months ago from a work event. I thought it was a rideshare driver I'd used once. Desperate, I typed out a quick message. Hi, I'm in labor and my husband's not answering. Can you please help me get to the hospital? I hit send without even double-checking who it was going to. A few seconds later, 3 dots appeared on my screen. Then a reply, "Where are you?" My breath caught. Relief washed over me, though I still didn't know who exactly I was talking to. I sent my address, explaining I was having contractions 5 minutes apart. Another contraction hit, and I doubled over in pain, gripping the bed frame. I tried calling Mark one last time. No answer. This time I left a voicemail, my voice breaking. Mark, please, I need you. The baby's coming. 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the rain outside my house. I expected to see a beat-up rideshare car, but when I opened the door, I froze. Standing in the rain was a tall man in a dark suit, holding an umbrella. His face was serious, his eyes searching mine. You texted me, he said. His voice was deep, steady, unfamiliar. Before I could respond, another sharp pain bent me forward. He stepped forward instantly, catching my arm. We need to go now, he said, guiding me toward a sleek black car parked at the curb. I didn't even have time to ask his name before he helped me into the passenger seat. As we sped off into the night, I noticed the faint smell of expensive cologne and the glowing dashboard lights that didn't match any rideshare I'd ever been in. Rain blurred the world outside, but inside, my mind was even more clouded. Who was this man? And why did my husband still refuse to answer? Little did I know, this stranger would not only deliver me to the hospital, but also deliver the truth about my marriage that would change my life forever. The man drove with a calm precision, the kind that made you feel both safe and unnerved. The windshield wipers swiped furiously against the rain, matching the rapid thud of my heartbeat. You're going to be fine, he said without looking at me. His voice was so certain it almost convinced me. I clutched my belly, trying to focus on my breathing the way my doctor had taught me. Who are you? I finally asked, my voice shaky. He glanced at me briefly before turning his eyes back to the road. We'll talk when you're safe. Right now, just hold on. The way he said it sent a shiver through me. My phone buzzed in my lap, and hope shot through me. Maybe it was Mark. But when I saw the screen, my heart sank. It was just a bank notification, a charge at a luxury hotel in the city. My stomach twisted, and it wasn't from the contractions. I remembered that Mark had left earlier that evening saying he had late meetings with a client. A hotel charge at midnight wasn't a meeting. The man next to me noticed my expression but didn't ask. Instead, he pressed harder on the accelerator as we hit the main road. The rain made the streetlights smear into long glowing streaks. Another contraction ripped through me, and I let out a small cry. He reached over, placing a steadying hand on my arm. Just a few more minutes, he said, his tone almost protective. As we neared the hospital, I realized how strange this situation was. I had sent a text meant for a rideshare driver, but somehow it had reached this man. How had that happened? We pulled up to the emergency entrance, and he was out of the car in an instant, opening my door and shielding me from the rain with his umbrella. Nurses rushed over with a wheelchair, and in the chaos, I caught the man giving quick, firm instructions to the staff. They seemed to recognize him. The moment they wheeled me inside, the bright fluorescent lights made me squint. I felt dizzy, exhausted, scared. But before they rolled me toward the delivery ward, I twisted in my seat, searching for him. He was still standing just outside the automatic doors, the rain pouring down around him, his gaze fixed on me. Our eyes met for just a second, and something in his expression told me this was not the last time I'd see him. Then the doors slid shut, and I was surrounded by nurses and the beeping of medical machines. I was barely able to process the whirlwind of activity around me when a nurse asked, "Sweetheart, do you want us to call your husband?" I hesitated, my throat tightening. I could have lied, could have said yes just to keep up appearances. But I heard myself whisper, "No, he knows." The nurse gave me a strange look, but didn't press further. She just tightened her grip on the wheelchair handles and pushed me down the hall. Somewhere inside me, through the fog of pain and fear, a seed of suspicion had already started to grow. And when I found out the truth, I wouldn't just be fighting for my child's safe arrival into the world. I'd be fighting for my own dignity, my future, and everything I thought I knew about love. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought I had a pretty clear picture of who I was: a devoted wife, a soon-to-be mother, and someone who believed that love was built on trust and sacrifice. I grew up in a small town 2 hours outside the city, raised by my mother after my father passed away when I was 8. My mother worked 2 jobs, waitressing in the mornings and cleaning offices at night, to keep food on the table. From her, I learned the value of hard work and quiet strength. When I met Mark, I was 25, working as an assistant in a marketing firm. He walked in one day as a new client, a tall, charming man with an easy smile and the kind of confidence that made the whole room lean toward him. He owned a mid-sized construction company that was rapidly growing. At first, I didn't think he'd notice me. But a week later, he asked me to lunch, to talk about ideas. It wasn't long before our relationship turned serious. Mark was attentive, generous, and made me feel like I was the center of his world. 2 years later, we were married in a small garden ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. My mother cried the whole time, happy tears, she said. The first few years were good. We bought a modest home, adopted a rescue dog, and spent weekends exploring the city. But as Mark's business grew, so did his time away from home. He started taking late-night calls, working long weekends, and attending more networking events than I could keep track of. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought it might bring us closer again. And at first it seemed like it did. Mark was excited, even giddy. He talked about baby names, painted the nursery, and bought me prenatal vitamins without me asking. But somewhere around the 6th month, I noticed a change. He became distant, distracted. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him sitting in the living room with his phone, texting someone, and quickly locking the screen when I walked in. I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was just work stress, that the pressure of becoming a father was weighing on him. But deep down, a small, uneasy voice whispered that something wasn't right. I wasn't helpless, though. Before quitting my job to prepare for the baby, I had quietly saved money from each paycheck. I didn't want to depend entirely on Mark, not because I didn't trust him at the time, but because I had grown up watching my mother struggle without a safety net. And now, sitting in that hospital bed with contractions tearing through me, I realized that independence might be my only lifeline. What I didn't know yet was that the person I had accidentally texted, the stranger who drove me through the storm, would soon become the key to uncovering exactly why my husband had ignored me that night. Life before that night had its challenges, but I always found a way to convince myself that everything was fine. Mark's long hours? Necessary for his growing business. His constant texting? Probably work-related. The late-night client dinners? Just networking. I was the kind of person who wanted to believe in the best version of people, especially the person I promised to love for the rest of my life. And in some ways, I think Mark counted on that. He knew I wasn't the type to push too hard or demand answers if he brushed me off with a smile and a kiss on the forehead. Pregnancy had changed me, though. It wasn't just about me anymore. Every decision I made, every ounce of energy I had, was now shared with the little life growing inside me. I was more aware of my surroundings, more protective, and whether I wanted to admit it or not, more suspicious. My days were simple. I'd wake up, make breakfast, and take short walks around the neighborhood to keep active. I'd read parenting books in the afternoon, jotting down notes in a worn-out notebook I kept on my nightstand. At night, I'd curl up in bed with my hands resting over my belly, feeling the faint kicks and imagining the moment I would finally meet my baby. I didn't have a big social circle. Most of my friends were scattered across the country, busy with their own lives. My best friend, Lila, had been my rock during the early months of pregnancy, but her new job kept her away for long stretches. My mother called almost every evening, asking how I felt, if I was eating enough, if Mark was taking good care of me. I always told her yes, even when I wasn't sure anymore. Mark and I had met for dinner just 2 nights before everything happened. It was supposed to be a rare, just us evening. I dressed up a little, even put on makeup for the first time in weeks. But instead of warmth, there was a strange distance between us that night. He spent half the meal scrolling through his phone, murmuring vague explanations about urgent work stuff. When the check came, he kissed my cheek and told me he had to swing by the office. I drove home alone, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I told myself it was hormones making me overly sensitive. But now, lying in that hospital bed hours after being ignored during one of the most important moments of my life, I couldn't keep pretending. Something was wrong. And that stranger, the one who appeared out of nowhere to help me, was about to pull back the curtain on a truth I had been too afraid to see. Because the wrong text I sent that night hadn't gone to a rideshare driver at all. It had gone to someone who knew my husband better than I ever imagined. The city hospital where I was admitted that night wasn't new, but it carried the weight of countless stories, births, losses, miracles, heartbreaks. The walls were painted a soft beige, the kind meant to be calming, though the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady beeping of monitors gave everything a sterile sharpness. From my bed, I could see rain streaking down the tall window across the room, the city lights bleeding into the wet glass. Outside, the storm hadn't let up. Every few seconds, the headlights of cars would flash by, reminding me there was a whole world moving on, unaware that my life had just cracked open. The maternity ward was quiet, except for the occasional distant cry of a newborn. Nurses moved in and out, their footsteps soft but purposeful. One of them, a kind woman named Hannah, kept checking my vitals and talking to me in a soothing tone. She smelled faintly of lavender, a small comfort in the whirlwind I was in. "First baby?" she asked, as she adjusted the monitor strapped to my belly. "Yes," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Her smile was warm. "You're doing great. Just focus on your breathing." But my mind wasn't on my breathing, it was on Mark. By now, he should have been here, pacing the floor, holding my hand, asking the nurses too many questions. That's what husbands were supposed to do. Instead, there was only silence from him. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my surroundings. The hospital's delivery rooms were spacious, each with a reclining bed, a wall-mounted TV, and a couch for partners or family members to rest on. Mine felt oddly empty, the couch pushed against the wall like it knew it wouldn't be used tonight. Every time the automatic doors down the hall slid open, I glanced toward them, hoping to see Mark's familiar figure. Instead, I saw only strangers, nurses, doctors, and a few other expectant parents being wheeled in. Then, through the narrow glass panel in my door, I saw him. The man from earlier, the one who had driven me here. He was speaking quietly with a nurse at the front desk, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. It struck me as strange that he hadn't left. Why was he still here? The nurse nodded at whatever he said, then disappeared into a back office. He glanced toward my door once, just long enough for our eyes to meet, before looking away. A fresh wave of curiosity mixed with the ache of betrayal in my chest. I wanted answers, but right now, I could barely focus through the contractions. My world was split in two. half of it consumed by the physical reality of labor, the other half tangled in questions I didn't know how to ask. And somewhere, deep down, I sensed that the sterile walls of this hospital would soon become the backdrop for more than just the birth of my child. Because the man standing outside my door wasn't just a stranger offering help, he was connected to the truth that would turn my entire life upside down. The hours crept by in that hospital room, each contraction tightening its grip on me, each minute stretching longer than the last. Outside my door, the steady rhythm of the hospital continued. Intercom announcements, the soft squeak of rubber soles, the occasional metallic clink of equipment being wheeled down the hall. Through it all, I couldn't shake the image of the man who brought me here. I kept replaying the sound of his voice, the decisiveness in the way he'd handled everything, and the fact that he hadn't introduced himself. His presence was like a shadow, close enough to sense but impossible to grasp. I didn't have long to dwell on it before Hannah returned with another nurse, this one younger, her eyes darting between me and the tablet in her hand. "Emily, your contractions are progressing," Hannah said. "We'll keep monitoring you, but it's looking like we might be meeting your baby sooner rather than later." Her words should have filled me with joy, but they only highlighted who wasn't there to share the moment. I looked at the empty couch again, imagining Mark sitting there, pretending to be calm but secretly terrified. I imagined his hand in mine, his whispered reassurances. Instead, I had an unanswered phone and a heart growing heavier by the hour. Somewhere around 3 a.m., the storm outside began to quiet, the rain slowing to a mist. I turned my head toward the window and saw the faint glow of the city skyline emerging from the clouds. It was beautiful in a lonely kind of way, like the world was catching its breath. I was drifting in and out of focus when the door opened slightly, and to my surprise, it wasn't a nurse who stepped in. It was him. The man in the suit. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," he said quietly, staying near the door. I stared at him, my mind torn between gratitude and suspicion. "You stayed?" His gaze didn't waver. "Yes. You were alone." Something in his tone told me there was more to it than simple kindness, but before I could ask, Hannah walked in. She looked at him, then at me, clearly sensing the tension. "Sir, we'll need to keep the room clear so Emily can rest," she said firmly. He nodded once, giving me a final glance before slipping out into the hallway. For the rest of the night, I couldn't stop wondering. Why would a stranger wait hours in a hospital for someone he didn't know? And why, when I looked into his eyes, did it feel like he knew something about me? Something I didn't yet know myself. By morning, I would have my answer, and it would be the first crack in the fragile picture I still had of my marriage. By the time the first pale light of dawn filtered through the hospital blinds, my exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. The contractions were steady now, the pain sharp but almost rhythmic, like my body had resigned itself to the process. The door opened, and for a moment, my heart leapt. I thought it might finally be Mark. But it was only Hannah, carrying a breakfast tray I couldn't imagine eating. "Any word from your husband?" she asked gently. I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," her eyes softened. "Do you want me to try calling him for you?" "No," I said quickly, maybe too quickly. "It's fine," but it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. At 7:12 a.m., my phone buzzed on the tray table beside me. My breath caught when I saw Mark's name flash on the screen. I answered instantly. "Mark, where are you? I've been calling all night." His voice was groggy, almost irritated. "Emily, calm down. I was busy." "Busy?" I repeated, disbelief lacing my words. "I'm in labor, Mark. Our baby is coming, and you didn't answer your phone all night. Where are you?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "I had to stay in the city. A client issue came up. I'll get there when I can." "When you can?" My voice cracked. "This is the birth of our child. How could you?" "Emily," he cut me off, his tone sharp now. "You always overreact. Just focus on the baby. I'll be there later." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hands shaking. All the little doubts I had pushed away over the past months came roaring back. Late nights, hotel charges, the way he pulled his phone close when I walked into the room. And then, as if to confirm my worst fears, another notification lit up the screen. It wasn't from Mark. It was from an unknown number. A photo. I hesitated, my stomach twisting as I tapped it open. The image showed Mark in the lobby of a luxury hotel, his arm wrapped around a woman in a red dress. They weren't just standing close, they were holding each other like lovers. The timestamp was from midnight, the exact time I had been trying to call him. I felt the air leave my lungs. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. Before I could process it, a new message appeared. You deserve to know the truth. I looked toward the door, my mind spinning. Was this from the stranger who brought me here? And if so, how did he have this picture? All I knew for certain in that moment was that the man I had married, the man I thought I knew, was not the man he pretended to be. I sat there, clutching the phone, my mind refusing to believe what my eyes had just seen. The woman in the red dress was striking, tall, with dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her smile both intimate and possessive. She wasn't some random acquaintance. The way she leaned into Mark, the way his hand rested at the small of her back, it was the body language of people who shared more than polite conversation. For years, I had defended him against whispers and doubts, even against my own uneasy thoughts. Now, the truth stared back at me in high resolution. The contractions kept coming, but the pain in my chest was far sharper than anything my body could produce. I didn't have long to spiral before the door opened again. This time, it was Mark. His hair was damp, like he'd just showered, and he wore the same suit I'd seen him leave in yesterday morning. You look terrible, he said as he stepped inside, glancing briefly at the machines and monitors before looking down at his phone. My voice shook, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. Where were you last night? He barely looked up. I told you. Client issue. Late meeting. End of story. I tightened my grip on the phone. Then explain this. I turned the screen toward him, showing him the photo. For the first time, his confident mask cracked. His eyes flickered, his jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly. That's nothing. She's just a friend from the industry. We ran into each other, that's all. Ran into each other at midnight in a hotel lobby? My voice was rising now. His tone hardened. Emily, you're stressed. You're in labor. This isn't the time for your drama. I almost laughed, except nothing about this was funny. My drama? Mark, I called you over and over while I was terrified and in pain, and you were holding another woman. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was trying to control the situation. Listen to me. We'll talk about this later. Right now, you need to focus on the baby. I pulled my hand back when he tried to touch me. I couldn't stand the thought of his skin on mine. Before either of us could say more, Hannah walked in, sensing the tension instantly. Sir, we need to prepare Emily for the next stage. You'll need to wait outside. Mark looked at me one last time, his expression a mix of annoyance and calculation, before slipping out into the hallway. As the door closed, I realized something chilling. He hadn't apologized. Not once. He wasn't worried about losing me. He was worried about controlling the narrative. And for the first time, I began to wonder if the stranger who helped me was here not by accident, but because he already knew exactly what kind of man my husband truly was. The morning passed in a blur of nurses, beeping monitors, and waves of pain that left me gripping the bed rails. Mark had returned to the room a couple of times, each visit shorter and colder than the last. He avoided eye contact, fiddled with his phone, and spoke in clipped sentences. By noon, my labor had slowed unexpectedly. The doctors decided to move me to a larger delivery suite in case they needed extra equipment. That meant wheeling me through the maternity ward, past the waiting area where visitors sat sipping bad coffee from vending machines. As the nurse guided my bed down the hall, I caught sight of a familiar figure standing near the far corner. Him, the man in the suit. He wasn't just loitering this time. He was speaking to someone. My breath caught when I realized who. The woman in the red dress. Even without the glamorous sheen from the hotel photo, she was striking. Her hair was pulled back now, her makeup lighter, but her presence radiated the same quiet confidence. She stood with her arms crossed, listening intently as the man spoke to her in a low, measured tone. I strained to hear, but the wheels of the bed squeaked too loudly. Still, I saw the way her expression shifted, from defensive to unsettled. Then she glanced toward me. Her eyes widened slightly, and she whispered something to the man before slipping out of sight. Mark appeared seconds later, stepping out of the same hallway she had disappeared into. He looked rattled, though he tried to mask it with a tight smile. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. Nothing, he said too quickly. Just talking to a friend. The nurse pushed me into the new suite before I could press further. But my heart was pounding now, not from labor, but from the sense that I was on the edge of something big. Not long after, the door to my suite opened without a knock. The man in the suit walked in, his presence instantly filling the space. Mark was by the window, scrolling on his phone, but he straightened when he saw him. "We need to talk," the man said, his gaze fixed on Mark. "This isn't the time," Mark replied, his tone flat but his grip on the phone tightening. "Oh, I think it is," the man countered, stepping closer. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped the screen, and turned it toward me. It was a video. Mark and the woman in the red dress at the same hotel, entering a room together. The timestamp matched the night I went into labor. The air left the room. My ears rang. Mark's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "That's not your biggest problem," the man said calmly. "Your biggest problem is that she's pressing charges for fraud." And just like that, my husband's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was about to become public, and very, very messy. The room fell into a tense silence. Even the steady beeping of the fetal monitor seemed distant. Mark's eyes darted between me and the man in the suit, calculating, as if weighing whether to deny everything or try to spin it into something less damning. "You're making a mistake," Mark said finally, forcing a thin smile. "This is some kind of misunderstanding." The man didn't even blink. "No misunderstanding. I have bank records, emails, and witnesses. The woman in the red dress? She's not just your mistress. She's also your partner in siphoning money from investors, including my company." The words hit me like a second contraction, sharp and unavoidable. "My husband, a cheater, yes, but also a criminal?" Mark took a step toward him. "You can't just walk in here and throw accusations around. My wife is in labor." "Exactly," the man said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Which is why I'm giving her the courtesy of hearing this from me before it's all over the news." The nurse, clearly sensing the confrontation brewing, stepped between them. "Gentlemen, you both need to leave if you're going to argue. This is not the place." But I found my voice before they could move. "Stay," I told the man. "Both of you. I want to hear everything." Mark's jaw clenched. "Emily?" "No," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You've been lying to me for months. You ignored me while I was in labor to be with her. Now I find out you've been stealing? You don't get to tell me when I can hear the truth." The man glanced at me, then nodded. "My name is Daniel Hayes. I own Hayes Capital. Your husband was hired as a contractor for one of my projects. Over the last 6 months, over $400,000 has gone missing. The trail leads to an offshore account in his name and hers." Mark's face turned a dangerous shade of red. "This is ridiculous. She's setting me up." Daniel's expression didn't change. "The police are already involved. I came here to give you a chance to come clean before they come to the hospital." The weight of his words pressed down on me. Everything suddenly made sense. The late nights, the expensive suits, the hotel bills, and the cold, terrifying part was that he hadn't even tried to deny the affair. Before Mark could respond, there was a knock at the door. 2 uniformed police officers stepped in, their presence filling the room with an entirely different kind of tension. "Mark Carter?" one of them asked. Mark froze. "Yes?" "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." And as they read him his rights in front of me, the nurses and Daniel, I realized my husband's fall from grace had just become a spectacle for everyone in the ward to witness. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut on Mark's wrists should have felt like justice, but instead, it hollowed me out. My chest ached, not for the man he was now, but for the man I thought I had married. The officers led him out of the room, his head down, avoiding my eyes. The door closed behind them, and suddenly the space felt enormous and empty. My breaths came shallow, and a strange dizziness washed over me. Hannah rushed to my side. "Emily, honey, I need you to take deep breaths. Stress can make the contractions harder." I nodded, but I couldn't focus. My thoughts were spinning. The betrayal, the affair, the fraud, the humiliation of it happening in a hospital where strangers had witnessed everything. It wasn't just that my marriage had ended. It was that it had imploded in front of an audience. My body shook uncontrollably. I wasn't sure if it was from the pain of labor or the weight of everything crashing down at once. Tears blurred my vision, and I tasted salt on my lips. Daniel was still standing in the corner, silent, watching me. I wanted to ask him why he'd helped me, why he'd been the one to tell me the truth instead of letting me live in ignorance for a little longer. But I couldn't form the words. The next contraction hit like a wave, forcing me to clutch the bed rails until my knuckles whitened. Hannah coached me through it, but when it passed, I slumped back against the pillows, drained. "You're stronger than you think," she murmured. I wanted to believe her. But in that moment, I felt anything but strong. I felt small, abandoned, and stripped of the future I thought I had. I kept picturing my mother's face when I would have to tell her what happened. I imagined the whispers from neighbors back home, the pitying looks, the inevitable "I'm so sorry" from people who didn't know what else to say. Daniel finally stepped forward. His voice was quiet but steady. "Emily, I know this is the worst moment of your life, but you're not alone in this. Not anymore." I turned my head toward him, my vision still foggy from tears. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a promise, maybe, or a determination that had nothing to do with pity. I didn't have the strength to respond. The only thing I could do was close my eyes and try to survive the next wave of pain, both in my body and in my heart. But somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of my collapse. It was only the beginning. The hours after Mark's arrest passed in a haze. Nurses came and went, adjusting monitors, checking my vitals, speaking in gentle tones I barely heard. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching everything happen from a distance. At some point, my mother arrived. I didn't even know who had called her. Maybe the hospital, maybe Daniel. But the moment she walked in, her face pale with worry, I broke. "Mom." My voice cracked, and I reached for her, like I was a child again. She sat beside me, brushing the damp hair from my forehead. "I'm here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." I buried my face against her arm and let the sobs come. They weren't quiet, polite tears. They were raw and shaking, pulled from somewhere deep. My whole body ached with them, and every contraction that came made the grief sharper. "I can't do this," I whispered between gasps. "Not alone." "You're not alone," she said firmly. "You have me. You have your baby. And you have the truth now. No more lies weighing you down." But the truth didn't feel freeing yet. It felt heavy, like a stone pressing on my chest. At one point, Hannah suggested I try to rest, dimming the lights and pulling the blanket higher. My mother stayed, holding my hand as my breathing steadied. But even with my eyes closed, I saw flashes of the last 24 hours. The unanswered calls, the hotel photo, the police walking in. Sleep never came. Around midnight, Daniel appeared again, this time without the suit jacket. He looked tired but composed, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He set one down for my mother, then turned to me. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. I almost laughed at the question. "I'm in labor, my husband's in jail, and the whole ward probably knows my business. How do you think I'm holding up?" A faint smile touched his lips, but his eyes stayed serious. "I think you're holding up better than you realize." I didn't respond. Daniel hesitated, then pulled a chair closer to the bed. "I know this is too much to take in right now. But I also know that men like him count on moments like this, moments when you're too hurt and too exhausted to fight back. Don't give him that power." His words settled over me, uncomfortable but true. I didn't have the strength to make promises, but I felt a flicker of something, a stubborn spark under all the pain. Maybe it wasn't strength yet, but it was the beginning of it. And though I couldn't see it then, that tiny spark was going to be the thing that pulled me out of this darkness. By the next morning, I was utterly drained. The labor had slowed again, giving me brief stretches of quiet between contractions, but my mind refused to rest. Mark's arrest, the affair, the fraud. It all felt like a nightmare I hadn't woken from. Daniel came back early, a file folder tucked under his arm. He waited until my mother stepped out to get some breakfast before pulling a chair to my bedside. "There's something you need to know," he began, his tone low and steady. "And I'm telling you this because you deserve the full picture, no matter how ugly it is." I braced myself. "What now?" He slid the folder onto my lap. Inside were printed bank statements, property records, and something I didn't expect. My name. "I don't understand." I said, flipping through the pages. Mark didn't just steal money, Daniel explained. He moved it into accounts under both your names. Legally, that ties you to every transaction. My stomach dropped. You're saying I could be charged too? If the wrong people believe you were involved, yes, but I don't think you were. And I can prove it. I stared at him, my voice barely above a whisper. Why are you helping me? He held my gaze. Because I've seen women like you before. Women blindsided by men who think they can ruin lives without consequence. And because... He hesitated, as if weighing whether to say the rest. Because I know what it's like to lose everything to someone you trusted. I didn't know what to say. He reached into the folder again and pulled out a second set of documents. These weren't financial. They were legal. Mark and your so-called friend in the red dress weren't just lovers. They were married, to each other, in Vegas, 2 months ago. The air left my lungs. That's impossible. We're still married. Which makes it bigamy, Daniel said quietly. Another felony. I sank back against the pillows, the pieces crashing into place. All those nights away, the distance, the hotel charges. He hadn't been living a double life metaphorically. He had literally built one. Daniel leaned forward. You're not just a victim of betrayal, Emily. You're a key witness now. The police will protect you. But you need to decide how much fight you have in you. Because this could get ugly before it gets better. My hands trembled as I closed the folder. I thought the worst had already happened. But now I realized I was standing at the edge of a much deeper hole. And if I didn't move carefully, I could fall right in with him. I couldn't stop staring at the folder in my lap. The crisp papers seemed to hum with danger. Every page another reminder that my life had been hijacked without me even realizing it. You're saying, I began slowly, that while I was at home painting the nursery, he was stealing money, marrying someone else, and putting me in the middle of it all? Daniel nodded once. Yes, and from the looks of it, he's been setting you up to take part of the blame if things went south. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the bed rails, trying to steady myself as the truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't just betrayal. It was entrapment. I thought back to all the little things Mark had done in the past months. Asking me to sign routine documents without reading them, urging me to open a joint savings account for the baby, insisting certain bills be paid from my personal checking account. I'd trusted him. I hadn't questioned a single thing. Now every memory felt poisoned. Daniel must have read the panic in my face because his tone softened. Emily, you're not going to prison. I've already spoken to my lawyers and they believe they can clear your name, but you need to cooperate fully and stay away from him. That won't be hard, I said bitterly. He gave a small, approving nod. Good. Because there's one more thing you need to see. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black flash drive, setting it gently on the blanket. Security footage from one of the properties Mark worked on. It shows him and her moving boxes out in the middle of the night. Those boxes contained evidence of the fraud. The police have it now. I swallowed hard. So, this is it? He's done? Legally, yes, but people like Mark don't go down quietly. You need to be ready for him to try and spin this, maybe even from behind bars. He'll paint himself as the victim if it serves him. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than grief or fear. I felt anger, sharp, clean, and grounding. I won't let him, I said. Daniel's gaze lingered on me for a moment, then he stood. That's the right answer. I'll check in later. When the door closed behind him, I lay back against the pillows, my heart pounding. Not from the labor this time, but from the weight of the decision forming in my mind. If Mark wanted to drag me into his mess, fine. But I wasn't going to be the quiet, broken wife in the corner anymore. I was going to stand up, speak out, and make sure everyone knew exactly who he really was. And for the first time, I started to believe I might win. 2 days after giving birth to my daughter, I left the hospital with more than just a newborn in my arms. I left with a decision. I wasn't going to let Mark's lies define the rest of my life. The first step was practical. I moved in with my mother temporarily, packing only essentials from the house Mark and I had shared. Every corner of that place felt tainted, every piece of furniture a reminder of the life I thought I had. My mother's small bungalow wasn't fancy, but it was warm and safe. While my mom helped with the baby, I began going through every document Daniel had given me. I met with his lawyers, signed statements, and gave the police everything I knew. At first, I was terrified. Legal language felt like a foreign tongue. But Daniel was there for every meeting, calm and steady. Physically, I was still recovering from childbirth, but emotionally, something inside me had shifted. I started walking every morning, pushing the stroller through quiet streets. The air felt cleaner than it had in months, and with each step, I felt pieces of myself returning. One afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror, the baby asleep in her bassinet. My reflection looked tired, yes, but there was a spark in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I brushed my hair, put on a touch of makeup, and for the first time since the wedding, slipped into a blazer I'd loved back when I worked at the marketing firm. It still fit. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was someone rebuilding. That night, Daniel called. "There's going to be a preliminary hearing in a few days," he said. "You don't have to attend, but if you want to make a statement, it could help the case." "I'll be there," I said without hesitation. Over the next few days, I prepared, not just my words, but my mindset. I read through every piece of evidence, rehearsed what I would say, and even practiced holding my posture in front of the mirror. This wasn't about looking perfect. It was about standing strong. When the morning of the hearing arrived, I dressed in a simple but sharp navy suit. My mother watched from the doorway as I adjusted the lapels. "You look like yourself again," she said softly. I kissed my baby's forehead before handing her to Mom. "I feel like myself again." As I walked out the door, I realized I wasn't just going to face Mark. I was going to face the world that had once seen me as just his wife. And this time, I'd make sure they saw me for who I really was. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters that morning, their cameras flashing as soon as they spotted Daniel and me walking side by side. I could hear the rapid clicks of shutters and the low hum of voices asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Daniel leaned slightly toward me. "Just keep walking. Don't stop. We'll talk inside." I kept my head high, every step deliberate. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like prey. I felt untouchable. Inside, the atmosphere was different. Cool, quiet, and humming with the low murmurs of attorneys and clerks. I took a seat in the front row of the public gallery, my hands resting calmly in my lap even though my pulse was racing. When they brought Mark in, I didn't flinch. He looked smaller somehow, his suit wrinkled, his expression tight. Our eyes met for the briefest moment, but I gave him nothing, not anger, not sadness, not even acknowledgement. The prosecutor outlined the charges: fraud, embezzlement, bigamy, and introduced the evidence. My name came up more than once, but each time it was followed by the statement that I had been unaware and uninvolved. Hearing that felt like a weight lifting from my chest. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "I came here today," I began, "not just as the victim of my husband's lies, but as a reminder that silence only protects the guilty. I trusted him. I built a life with him, and he repaid that trust with betrayal, theft, and deceit. But I am not broken, I am not ashamed, and I refuse to let his actions define who I am or the life my daughter will grow up to know." My voice didn't waver, not once. When I sat back down, I saw Daniel give a small nod, his expression unreadable, but his approval clear. After the hearing, the judge set a trial date and denied Mark's bail request. As we exited the building, the reporters surged forward again, but this time, I stopped. "I have one thing to say," I told them, my voice carrying over the crowd. "Don't feel sorry for me. Feel sorry for the people who think they can destroy others and walk away without consequences." The flash of cameras was blinding, but I didn't look away. Later, in the quiet of Daniel's car, he glanced at me and said, "You know, you just became the story, not him." I smiled faintly, looking out the window at the city passing by. Good, that's exactly what I wanted. Because this wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about rewriting the ending to a story Mark he controlled. The trial didn't happen immediately. It took weeks of depositions, evidence reviews, and media speculation. In that time, my life began to settle into a new rhythm. Early mornings with my daughter, afternoons spent working with Daniel's legal team, and quiet evenings at my mother's house. But I knew the real confrontation was still ahead. When the trial date finally arrived, the courthouse was even more crowded than during the hearing. News vans lined the street, reporters jostling for position. Inside, the gallery was packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and a handful of people from my old life. Neighbors, acquaintances, even a couple of Mark's business associates who had once treated me like background decoration. Daniel leaned toward me before we walked in. "You don't have to speak today. The evidence will do most of the work." "I want to speak," I said firmly. "He needs to hear it from me." When Mark was led in, he looked worse than before. Pale, thinner, and avoiding my eyes entirely. His lawyers tried to project confidence, but even they seemed to know this was a losing battle. The prosecution went first, presenting the mountain of evidence. Bank records, surveillance footage, sworn testimonies. And then the video of Mark and the woman in the red dress entering the hotel the night I went into labor. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Finally, the judge allowed me to take the stand. I walked past Mark without looking at him, keeping my eyes on the jury. "I'm here today," I began, "because I refused to let my silence be used as his shield. I was a wife who loved and trusted her husband. I believed his late nights were for work, not deceit. I believed the documents he asked me to sign were for our future, not for covering his crimes. And I believed that when the time came for our child to be born, he would be there for me." I paused, letting the silence stretch. Instead, he was with her, stealing, lying, and building a life that didn't include me or our baby. I turned slightly toward him, my voice sharp now. "Mark, you thought I'd be too weak, too broken to stand here. But you were wrong. I'm stronger now than I have ever been, and the only thing you've managed to take from me is the illusion that you were ever the man I thought you were." A hush fell over the room. When I stepped down, I caught sight of the jury. Several members were visibly moved. Daniel gave me the faintest smile as I sat beside him. And for the first time since that night in the hospital, I felt the scales of justice beginning to tip in my favor. The rest of the trial felt like watching a carefully built tower collapse in slow motion. Each witness the prosecution called chipped away at whatever defense Mark's lawyers tried to construct. Former employees spoke about unusual financial requests. Investors testified about missing funds. And then came the woman in the red dress, Vanessa. I had expected to feel hatred when she walked in, but what I felt instead was something colder, detachment. She looked smaller in person, her confidence dulled by the gravity of the courtroom. Under questioning, she admitted to her relationship with Mark, to the secret Vegas marriage, and to helping him move stolen assets. The final blow came when the prosecution played a recording of a phone call between the two of them, discussing how to pin the blame on me if things went south. My name was said like a throwaway pawn in their scheme. The jury's faces hardened. When the closing arguments ended, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict was read in a clear, steady voice, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Mark to 15 years in prison without the possibility of early release for the financial crimes, plus additional time for bigamy. Vanessa received a shorter sentence in exchange for her cooperation. But the real moment of closure didn't come from the gavel striking. It came when the bailiffs moved to take Mark away. He glanced back, perhaps expecting me to look broken, to show some sign of regret or longing. Instead, I stood tall, my expression unreadable, and gave him a single deliberate nod, as if to say, "You tried to destroy me, and you failed." The cameras outside the courthouse caught every step as Daniel and I walked out together. The reporters surged forward again, microphones extended. This time, I didn't hesitate. "I stood here months ago and told you not to feel sorry for me," I said into the crowd. "Today, I'll tell you something else. Never underestimate the strength of someone who has been hurt and has nothing left to lose. My daughter will grow up knowing the truth, not the lies he tried to bury us under." The cheers from the onlookers were unexpected, but they warmed me. Somewhere behind the crowd, I saw my mother holding my baby, her proud smile shining brighter than the flashbulbs. As Daniel guided me toward the car, he murmured, "That was more than a victory in court. That was a statement." I looked at him, my voice steady. Good, because I didn't just want justice. I wanted everyone to see exactly who he really was. And now, they did. Life after the trial felt different. not just because Mark was gone, but because I no longer carried the weight of his lies on my shoulders. My days were quieter, yet fuller. I woke each morning to my daughter's tiny coos, the soft light spilling through my mother's kitchen window, and the comforting smell of coffee brewing. The world outside still buzzed with curiosity about the pregnant wife who exposed her husband's crimes. Reporters occasionally called, and a few magazines even offered me interviews. I turned most of them down. This wasn't about fame, it was about moving forward. But I did agree to one interview, a live segment for a women's empowerment network. Sitting in the brightly lit studio, my hands folded neatly in my lap, I felt strangely calm. The host introduced me as Emily Carter, mother, survivor, and advocate. She asked me about the hardest moment of my journey. I didn't hesitate. It wasn't finding out about the affair. It wasn't even the fraud, I said. It was the moment in the hospital when I realized I couldn't count on the person I thought was my partner. That was the real breaking point. And what got you through it, she asked. I smiled faintly. My daughter, and the decision that I would rather face the truth and rebuild than live in a lie that kept me small. When the segment aired, messages poured in from women all over the country, some strangers, some old friends, sharing their own stories of betrayal, resilience, and starting over. I didn't respond to all of them, but I read every word. And I realized something. I wasn't just healing for myself anymore. My story had become a lifeline for others. At home, my daughter was thriving. She had my eyes and, thankfully, none of Mark's features. Watching her learn to smile, to grab my finger with her tiny hand, reminded me that life was still capable of giving me beauty, even after everything had been stripped away. One evening, Daniel stopped by with a small gift bag. Inside was a leather-bound journal. "For your next chapter," he said. I ran my fingers over the smooth cover, feeling the weight of it. "I think I'm ready to write it," I replied. He smiled. "I think you've already started." Because survival wasn't just about getting through the worst, it was about choosing to build something better afterward. And that was exactly what I planned to do. Months passed, and with each one, I felt lighter. The bitterness that had once wrapped around my chest, like a vice, began to loosen. My focus was no longer on what I had lost, but on what I was building. I enrolled in an online business course, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off for Mark's schedule. Late at night, after my daughter was asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my laptop, jotting notes into the leather-bound journal Daniel had given me. Ideas grew into plans, and plans began to take shape as something real, a small consulting business for women looking to protect themselves financially. It wasn't just about work, it was about reclaiming control. One afternoon, I took my daughter to the park. The sun was warm, the air crisp, and she giggled every time I pushed the stroller over a patch of bumpy grass. A woman sitting on a nearby bench recognized me from the news. She hesitated before speaking. "I just want you to know," she said softly. "I left my husband after watching your interview. I'd been afraid for years, but you gave me the courage." I didn't know what to say at first. Finally, I smiled. "Then we both got free, didn't we?" Walking home that day, I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a thread in a larger tapestry of women who had decided that they were worth more than the lies they were living. On the anniversary of the night I went into labor, my mother suggested we do something symbolic. So we drove to the coast, just me, her, and my daughter. Standing on the shore, I wrote Mark's name on a small slip of paper, tucked it inside a seashell, and threw it into the waves. The ocean swallowed it whole. I turned to see my mother smiling, my daughter's chubby hand reaching toward the gulls overhead. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely unburdened. Later that evening, I opened my journal and wrote one final entry for that chapter of my life. I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become after. I closed the book and set it on the shelf, ready to start the next one. Because in the end, my life wasn't defined by the night my husband betrayed me. It was defined by the day I decided I would never betray myself again.